The next day, Don Quixote arrived at a crossroad and immediately thought of the novels where knights-errant chose their paths. Following the book's example, he loosened the reins and let his horse decide for itself. How did the horse feel about this? Not far from its home, the skinny horse remembered exactly where its stable was, so it made up its mind to gallop towards the village. After a few kilometers, he suddenly saw a group of merchants approaching. Don Quixote believed he was encountering a marvelous adventure. Just like in the book, he sat up proudly in the saddle, gripping his lance firmly and shielding his chest with his shield. He stood in the middle of the road, held back his horse, and awaited the approaching group. When they got close enough to exchange greetings, Don Quixote raised his voice proudly and said, "All of you must acknowledge the peerless beauty in the world. None can bear comparison with the lady of my heart in La Mancha, the unique Dulcinea del Toboso." Who was that? Exactly that village maiden. But Don Quixote had already renamed her in his mind, considering her his ideal lady. So he declared to everyone that she was of utmost importance, warning them not to pass without acknowledging her. The merchants, seeing this strange figure and hearing his words, thought he was mad. They decided to tease him, and one of them said, "We don't know who this beauty you speak of is. If you want us to acknowledge her, then show her to us." Don Quixote replied, "Why should you need to see her to acknowledge her? The key is to believe without seeing and to wholeheartedly accept it as truth. If you refuse, then come and face me in combat. Let's settle this." The merchant continued to jest. "Show us a picture then. We've been longing for this lady you speak of. Even if one of her eyes is blind and the other bleeds vermilion and sulfur, we'll still praise her to please you." Upon hearing this, Don Quixote was furious. He knew they were mocking him. Grabbing his lance, he charged towards the merchant. But unfortunately, his horse stumbled and threw him into the field, rolling him quite a distance away. Poor Don Quixote, weighed down by his equipment, lance, shield, armor, he couldn't even get up after the fall. To make matters worse, a grumpy lad from the merchant group approached him and snapped his lance in two with a click, then proceeded to give Don Quixote a good beating. Our unlucky knight, beaten sore all over, couldn't get back up. What should he do? In such a dire situation, Don Quixote pondered and said to himself, "Even knights in the books don't win every battle. They're bound to get injured sometimes." Reciting a passage, he lamented, "Where are you, my lady? How can you show no pity for my pain? Perhaps, my lady, you are unaware of my pain, or worse, you have forsaken me." Don Quixote had another wild idea. Just then, a fellow villager happened to pass by. Recognizing Don Quixote in such a sorry state, he helped him onto his donkey, tied Don Quixote's weapons and shield together, and made Don Quixote's skinny horse carry them. Leading the donkey with one hand and the horse with the other, they headed back towards the village. The villager was thoughtful enough to wait until nightfall before entering the village, sparing Don Quixote the embarrassment of being seen in such a sorry state. And so, our gallant knight-errant concluded his first adventure. But did he give up? Not at all. Next up was the famous windmill battle, where Don Quixote was about to face his next challenge. Initially, Cervantes had planned just a short story, but after finishing Don Quixote's first adventure, he felt he hadn't had his fill and continued writing, expanding the tale with more characters entering the story. Who entered next? First, Don Quixote's friends, the village priest and a barber. When Don Quixote was brought home, his housekeeper was complaining to them, "My master has been missing for 3 days. He must have gone out pretending to be a knight, all because of those nonsensical books." Just then, they saw the villager returning with a disheveled Don Quixote. Though barely able to dismount, Don Quixote sat upright on his donkey, saying, "Don't listen to them. It's all that horse's fault for getting me hurt. Get me to bed and find a way to summon the lady healer, Urganda, to tend to my wounds." The housekeeper grumbled, "No need for any Urganda. We'll take care of you." Then he cursed the night novels again. "These books have ruined your mind." Together, they helped Don Quixote onto his bed. As they burned the books, they also critiqued them, pointing out Cervantes' own criticisms of the popular novels at the time through the characters' dialogue, poking fun at their flaws. This was Cervantes' initial intention when writing Don Quixote. Yet, Cervantes had personal biases. He praised some novels written by his friends or individuals he admired, even going so far as to lavish praise on their prose and poetry collections in his book. After burning the books, his friends were hoping that Don Quixote would recover and stop acting crazy. When Don Quixote woke up, he found the books gone, and he was unable to enter his study. His niece came to tell him, "A magician has arrived and made all those books in your study disappear." After hearing this, Don Quixote believed the magician to be a character from the night novels, and he firmly believed the magician had been sent by another knight to oppose him. He immediately declared, "Let's see what fate has in store. No one can defy destiny." He believed himself to be an extraordinary knight, since someone has sent a magician to oppose him. For the next 15 days, Don Quixote seemed quite obedient and didn't cause any more trouble. But in reality, he secretly persuaded a local farmer, who was also a famous character in the book, Sancho Panza. Sancho was a short, chubby man with a comical appearance. Don Quixote found Sancho and convinced him with promises, saying he would become a king in the future and reward Sancho with an island to govern. So now, Sancho was following Don Quixote, leaving behind his wife and children, quietly leaving the village for their second adventure. This time, Don Quixote even had a squire. He seemed quite impressive. Their first encounter was the famous windmill battle. Here's how the story goes. Don Quixote saw 30 to 40 windmills in the countryside and said to Sancho, "Can you see those giants? I will go and destroy them to make contributions to God." Sancho said, "Where are the giants? Those are windmills." Don Quixote immediately scolded Sancho, saying, "You are so ignorant. You're as stupid as a wooden block." He told him to stay aside and rode his skinny horse to rush forward. At this moment, a slight wind started to blow, and the windmills began to turn. Don Quixote saw them and said, "Even if you wave your arms more than a great giant, I will still fight with you." He completely imagined a hallucination that didn't exist in reality. After saying all this, he devoutly prayed to his lady Dulcinea, asking her to protect him in this critical moment. Then he shielded himself with his shield, dragged his long spear, and urged his horse forward, charging towards the first windmill. He aimed to kill the giant windmill, but his spear struck its wings, which were spinning vigorously in the wind. The force pulled his spear in, tossing both him and his horse aside. He rolled on the ground, utterly battered. Seeing this, Sancho quickly rode over on a donkey to rescue him. Getting close, Sancho found Don Quixote unable to move, having been thrown hard by his own horse. This was Don Quixote's battle with the windmills, only 2 pages in total, yet it became one of the most famous scenes in literary history. There have been many interpretations by later readers of Don Quixote's battle with the windmills. Some say it symbolizes heroism in the face of inevitable failure, where the giant windmill represents all the obstacles and even malice we encounter in life, whether external or internal obsessions, curses, or illusions. Don Quixote, battling against the windmills, almost inevitably ends in defeat. But even so, he charges ahead. As Nietzsche said, life ultimately is tragic, yet even in tragedy, we should embrace our lives filled with pain and despair. So, sometimes reading is really about interpretation. You'll see what is in your heart,